I'm going to go ahead and get started. Again, if you have any text question or tech questions, feel free to send me, Andrea Eckelberger, a message in the chat, and I will do my best to help you troubleshoot that. All right, could we go to the next slide? So welcome to our coffee break. We started these coffee breaks during the pandemic, as so many things started. We were supposed to be in Malmo, Sweden in 2020 for our symposium. And unfortunately, we're not able to hold a symposium that year in Sweden. But we decided that we would like to find a way for members to keep in touch. So that's where the coffee breaks came along from. And we used fika, which is the Swedish word for a moment to slow down and appreciate the good things in life. Essentially, it means coffee with friends. So that's what we're doing today, is we're slowing down, we're appreciating our friends, appreciating our colleagues, and getting a chance to learn about some amazing work that is happening in the Lessell world. All right, could we go to the next slide? So I'm going to hand it over in just a moment to our presenter that we have today, who's Cydnee Sanders, who I met in St. Paul, Minnesota, but is currently in Houston. So living down south, directly south of Minnesota. And today, Cydnee is going to be talking about the Anti-Racist Study Circle and Facilitators Guide that she created as part of her work at Hamline University. Can we go to the next slide? We have a lot of board members here, and two of us will be facilitating. So Rola is the past president. And again, my name is Andrea Eckelberger. I'm the president. And then we have our colleague, Kate, who is actually, I think right now is Monica, is going to be taking notes. Yeah, so Monica and Rola, if you want to go ahead and turn on your cameras.
And Marcel is here with us too.
And I think Katie as well. So we have.
And Katie too, yeah.
We have some board representation here.
Hi.
All right. If we could go to the next slide. People have already started sharing in the chat, but if we could just do it one more time now that more people are in, since we can't go back and see the chat, please let us know where you are joining us from today. And why not, what's the temperature there? I always love doing these sorts of questions whenever we're doing Lessell, is having to go back and forth between Celsius and Fahrenheit. I feel like it's a really good exercise for my brain. All right, so it looks like we have good representation from Canada, Virginia. 49 degrees Fahrenheit in San Francisco. I'm so jealous. Netherlands, Arizona. We have a pretty wide range from around the world. All right, well, if you just joined, feel free. We are putting in the chat where we are from and the current temperature, which is just like talking about the weather is one of the things that Minnesotans do best. So I'm glad that we could start off with that for Cydnee and I. All right, Cydnee, would you want to switch to the next slide? So we're so happy you're here today. The goal of our time together is first and foremost to connect with fellow Lessell educators. We're going to be learning from our guest speaker today about the Anti-Racist Praxis Study Circle and Facilitators Guide that she developed. And then at the end, we'll be sharing a few Lessell updates. And so I'm going to go ahead at this point and hand it over to my colleague and my friend, Cydnee Sanders. Cydnee, if you want to go to the next slide. And I'm going to go off screen and hand it over to Cydnee. Oh, and just to let people know that we'll be having time at the end for questions. So feel free to put questions in the chat as they come up, so that they're at the forefront of your mind. Roland and I will be keeping track of those questions. If there is anything that needs to come up that you need clarification, we will jump in and ask Cydnee to provide some clarification for that. But for the most part, we're going to ask, please hold your questions until the end. We'll also be taking notes throughout. So if people are sharing any resources, anything in the chat, we'll be grabbing those links and putting them in our notes slide. And then after the session, we will be sending out an email with a link to the recording, a link to the note slides that has those resources and the main points, and a link to a copy of the slides as well. And that will have all of the different links that Cydnee has put in here. All right, I am going to turn off my video and I'm going to hand it over to our presenter.
All right, thanks, Andrea. And thanks just to Lesla for, in general, inviting me to come do this and to share this project that I have developed. All right. Again, my name is Cydnee Sanders. It's pronounced like the city Cydney, though I know the spelling is confusing. I use she, her pronouns. Excuse me. And I, as Andrea said, I'm speaking to you from outside of Houston, in my hometown called Magnolia, and where it is right now 85 degrees Fahrenheit, which that one's a little tricky. I don't know if it's maybe closer to 30 degrees Celsius, but we have a high today of 100 degrees, which is over 40 Celsius. So we have had, certainly it hasn't been under 100 degrees, I don't know, in the last couple of weeks. So definitely a hot summer here. I lived in Minnesota, as Andrea said, for the last few years, but I just moved back to my parents in Texas after I finished my master's at Hamline University, my MA TESOL, in December, and then I moved back here. And so my location right now, as I said, says Houston because I've been traveling on and off all year, because I was going to do this anyway after finishing grad school, but then also, it's been a really difficult last couple of years. So I wanted to make sure I took time to travel, to relax, and kind of heal from some major burnout I've been feeling before I head to South Africa in the new year, where I'm going to teach under the Fulbright program, if anyone knows what that is. So I'm so excited for that. And hopefully we'll continue my journey in anti-racist teaching, which I'll get into more of what that means in a bit. But specifically when I go to South Africa to see like what is a multilingual society like there, and how does that relate to teaching English and its role in their society. Just a fun fact, my next trip is actually on Thursday. I'm headed to Seattle and Alaska for a family vacation, and then down to Portland for a friend's wedding. So some traveling in the States too. As Andrea said, today I'll be telling you about my anti-racist praxis study circle that I developed while I was finishing school in Minnesota with Atlas, who is a part of Hamline University. And so it was really great to work with Patsy and others at Atlas to help develop this. And then also the facilitator's guide that accompanies the study circle, so people can take these materials and go do it on their own, right, without necessarily me being involved. So I'll get more into what does that mean. All right, so first, what is this anti-racist praxis study circle and facilitators guide? As I said, it was my master's project at Hamline, and as also developed it with Atlas, right? So it was really a collaboration that, we worked on it together, and we piloted it in the fall, but then we're also running the second run of it this summer, and our last meeting is tomorrow. For those who don't know what a study circle is, necessarily that term, it's a form of professional development that I believe, most importantly, follows this idea that there needs to be more than one meeting for professional development, right? There needs to be some consistency, some continuation of really delving into these topics, learning about something, discussing it, trying new things, reflecting, and then keep improving, right? And it's also, study circles tend to be small groups, like 8 to 12 people. So you can really focus on the specific topic and have lots of small groups discussions, right? So it's very interactive. My study circle consists of 5 meetings of 2 hours of material. I'll explain a little bit more of the specifics of that, but so it's roughly 10 hours of professional development. And the facilitator's guide is a detailed guide. We'll look at what does it look like. I'll pull it up in a little bit too. That's hopefully easy to use, right? So I really do want this to be so that anyone could take these materials and go do it with their own coworkers, right? So that you can adapt it to your own context. Excuse me. All right. So next, why did I create it? I feel like it's important for me to share, the motivation behind this too. And a huge part of my identity is that I am multiracial. So I have, sorry, hold on one second. I haven't talked too much this morning and I have really bad allergies, so forgive me. As I said, a huge part of my identity is that I am multiracial. So I have African, Native American, and European ancestors, and I experience racism every day. And every day I'm reminded in these subtle ways and not so subtle ways that, society was not made for me, at least in the United States context, right? So in school, I felt invisible and unimportant from curriculum that didn't reflect me and my family. I thought that I was stupid when I was younger because I kind of move at a slower pace. I have to think about things and reflect on things that you've probably said like 10 minutes ago, right? Or even longer than that, which really made me feel like I was inferior to everyone else, right? But instead of understanding that it comes from a different culture who believes in listening first and processing before I just jump in and say things, right? Or that I knew my grandparents didn't talk, quote unquote, right. They are from Louisiana and speak, I think, a kind of version of African-American vernacular, right? And I knew that that's not how I'm supposed to speak, right? And was really taught that I have to speak like I'm educated. And also, I speak only English because my family was forced to lose our indigenous languages because of racism, right? So I've lost, I don't know how many indigenous African and Native American languages, right? And there's that pain I feel every day as a language teacher, knowing that language shapes how we think, how we communicate. And my family's way has been lost, right? Because we were seen as less than human beings. And that's something that I refuse to let continue in English teaching today. And so this quote I want to share because I feel like it sums it up pretty well in his book, Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. If you have not read this book, and I actually highly recommend the audiobook where Trevor Noah reads it himself, it's so good. It's an important book to me because it was the first book that I read by someone who's multiracial and who identifies as that. And it talks about like what it's like to have parents who look different than you and to come from 2 different cultures, right? So on a personal note, highly recommend it. But on a professional note, I really like this quote. And here he's paraphrasing a famous Nelson Mandela quote, but I liked Trevor's kind of spin on it. He says, "When you make the effort to speak someone else's language, even if it's just basic phrases here and there, you are saying to them, I understand that you have a culture and an identity that exists beyond me. I see you as a human being." And above all else, I want to make sure the learners that I teach know that I see them as human beings. And I believe the way to do this is through anti-racist and culturally responsive teaching. All right, and we'll get into more. Okay, what does that mean? So the other part of my motivation for doing this is also that when I started at Hamlin, I was learning more about equity-focused approaches to teaching English, but I noticed this huge gap in professional development that was offered in Minnesota. Nothing really went past racial equity 101, right? The basisms of what is racism. And everything was so reflective and didn't have clear classroom applications. And I really wanted something that went beyond those basics and that had those clear classroom applications, right? And then also because I am a person of color, or the term BIPOC, if people are familiar with that, so Black, Indigenous people of color, right? Since I'm a BIPOC educator, I felt invisible in any of the professional development we were doing, because so much of our professional development was focused on white fragility and white culture, right? And that's not particularly relevant to me. Like, yes, I have privilege as a light-skinned person, and so like that's something, but I don't need all of my professional development to be about white fragility and white culture, right? So through the study circle, it's of course open to all English teachers, right? But I hope that it's especially inclusive of BIPOC educators and our professional development needs, which are often, like I said, overlooked in a lot of trainings. And then at the beginning of the development of this project, a group of my coworkers and I started meeting a couple times a month to first help each other figure out, where do we start, right? What resources should we be looking at, to start having some of these deep conversations that we knew we wanted to have. But then also another important part of it was we wanted to hold each other accountable, because often this work isn't prioritized. It certainly wasn't prioritized by our supervisors. And so I'm happy to say, this group is still going, and they were such a huge part of my developing of this project. So I think the big question that I want to make sure we understand, what's in the study circle, right? And I obviously named it the Anti-Racist Praxis Study Circle. So I feel like it's good to make sure we all understand, what does that mean, or what definitions am I using? So to kind of give you that overview, right? These are the two terms that really guided my research, right? And also guide how I think about the racism I experience as a student, as a teacher, as an employee of color. So in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi, highly recommend if you have not read it already. Kendi describes an anti-racist policy or an idea is one that produces or sustains racial equity between racial groups. In other words, actively breaking down any hierarchy, right? He says that it's not enough to be not racist, but that an anti-racist breaks down those hierarchies that you see in racism, right? I believe as educators, it's our jobs to see how these hierarchies are perpetuated in our classrooms, whether it's in our curriculum or our expectations of student communication, right? And I like this view of anti-racism because as a person of color, he's saying that I can still perpetuate racist hierarchies, right? Racist ideas, these power imbalances. So it's important for me to also do this work. And the second term, praxis, y'all may be familiar with, comes from, and I never know how to say his name correctly, but Paulo Freire, who was a Brazilian educator, really well known in the education world, I believe, in his book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, where he explains that praxis combines both reflection and action. You can't have one without the other, right? And that is really my hope with the study circle, is that we have some reflection, right? But I believe many people tend to get stuck there. And so we have to take action too. So I'm hoping I'm really bridging both of those with this study circle, right? And Andrea mentioned this, but I just want to repeat that all of these sources that I am, referring to, you'll see them linked in the slides that she sends after, all right? And of course, the study circle goes into more depth of what, are examples of racist hierarchies in the English language teaching English classroom. But just for an example, right? English only policies, monolingual ideologies versus multilingual ideologies, the idea of standardized English and how we promote, speaking correct English, right? We have also, thinking about an asset-based approach versus a deficit-based approach, especially when we're working with adult learners, right? And I hope that this, like I said, study circle is a good mix of both reflection and action on all of these hierarchies, right? And some of these books, some of these sources are books and articles, but an also important part for me was that as educators, I know we don't often have time to read that many heavy text, right? Academic text. And so I also wanted to make sure I picked a variation of media to make this information as accessible as possible. So I wanted us to take a look at a clip of Kendi speaking about being an anti-racist. And it's an example of one of the sources that I used. All right, so let's take a look. It's a TED Talk that's available. I highly recommend the whole thing, but we'll just look at a couple of minutes, all right? And, you know, Andrea, please let me know as I switch to this if the sound is working or not working, all right?
What I'm trying to do with my work is to really get Americans to eliminate the concept of not racist from their vocabulary and realize we're either being racist or anti-racist. We're either expressing ideas that suggest certain racial groups are better or worse than others, superior or inferior than others. We're either being racist or we're being anti-racist. We're expressing notions that the racial groups are equals, despite any cultural and ethnic differences. We're either supporting policies that are leading to racial inequities and injustice, like we saw in Louisville, where Breonna Taylor was murdered, or we're supporting policies and pushing policies that are leading to justice and equity for all. And so I think we should be very clear about whether we're expressing racist ideas, about whether we're supporting racist policies, and admit when we are. Because to be anti-racist is to admit when we expressed a racist idea, is to say, you know what? When I was doing that in Central Park, I was indeed being racist, but I'm gonna change. I'm gonna strive to be anti-racist. And to be racist is to constantly deny the racial inequities that pervade American society, to constantly deny the racist ideas that pervade American minds. And so I want to build a just and equitable society. And the only way we're going to even begin that process is if we admit our racism and start building an anti-racist world. Thank you.
All right, so I think hopefully the video went okay for everyone. And again, I know I'm talking about a US context, right? But I do believe a lot of what I talk about in the study circle can have a global, perspective to it. So, I hope that it's at least adaptable, right? Because I do believe that if we are being anti-racist, right, we can also think about this as, in any culture where there's a majority and a minority, of making sure that we're being inclusive of all cultures and all languages in the classroom, right? But again, just want to clarify that I also know I'm talking about a very US specific example. So the other two main frameworks, for lack of a better word, I don't like frameworks, but I can't think of anything better, that really guided my project are this idea of culturally responsive teaching and translanguaging, right? And I know this is probably a lot of terms to keep straight, at least for right now, but I hope some of you are at least familiar with these concepts. But I did want to explain the way that one of my professors explained this to me, which was really helpful, right? So she would say that think of culture responsive teaching as like the main umbrella, right? That covers honoring all of learners' identities, right? All of their experiences, all of their cultures, right? And then translanguaging kind of narrows down into specifically honoring linguistic identities, right? Making sure that we include and value all of learners' languages within the classroom, right? And getting away from the idea of English only policies, right? And since including and valuing learners' identities is part of that breaking down of those racist hierarchies that Kendi was talking about, right? I really mix all of these, really mix these two ideas with examples of, okay, what does this look like for classroom application? And translanguaging is especially one of those main focuses for me in this study circle. So let's first also make sure that everyone understands what I mean by translanguaging, or at least, how I'm using it in this context. The definition I use comes from Ofelia Garcia, and she talks about translanguaging is using learners' full linguistic repertoire or toolbox, right? And I really like this idea. And it's a new way for me to think about languages, right? And I'm assuming it's new for a lot of people to think about that it's all one language toolbox, right? And a lot of recent research has been exploring as to why a multilingual approach, to teaching English has more benefits than English only policies. And if you haven't read much on this, I highly recommend, looking into that. But what's key for me about Garcia's argument is that translanguaging gets rid of racist hierarchies. And I got the scale idea from another one of my professors. And I think it's just a good visual of what I'm talking about, of getting rid of those racist hierarchies, right? We're not worried about political boundaries of who's a native speaker, right? For an example, or, things like that. We are thinking about languages as one toolbox. So it's up to learners to decide for themselves, what language is best, or what word, right, is best in any given context or moment, right? So it's up to us as English teachers to provide them with those English tools as part of their learning goals. So then they can, then have the agency to pick, what works best for them, right? And kind of the two most important things that I take from Garcia's research, again, is this idea that translanguaging sees learners' other languages as assets, not as something that inhibits the learning of English, which in English only policies are monolingual approaches to teaching English, right? They are not seen as an asset, they are seen as a deficit, right? And I want to get away from that. And then second, translanguaging removes that language hierarchy, as I said, that has existed during the history of teaching English, right? And it's demanded that English is superior to all other languages in your career and in school, right? And that, again, other languages inhibit the ability to learn English. And like I said, I really like this visual of the scales, right? And thinking of this as a language toolbox, right? So that learners then get to decide what tools they want to use. Like another kind of main idea of what is in this study circle, right? If I'm not throwing too much at you right now, is in that article by Ofelia Garcia, it's really the only source that I found that talked about translanguaging in adult English classes. I'm sure it's not the only one exists, but what I was looking at, it really was the only adult one, because so much of everything was K-12, right? And so I highly recommend this article to see real examples of what translanguaging could look like in the adult English classroom, right? But I also liked this article because she argued that we need to get rid of this traditional view of a teacher's role, which is something I think a lot of us have been kind of getting away from, right? But I don't think, completely. A role that, the teacher holds power and gives knowledge to the students, right? And she argues that we need to reimagine these into 4 new roles for the teacher, right? So she talks about being a co-learner, right? Of putting everyone on an equal footing so that everyone's teaching and everyone's learning, right? And we're really trying to be a detective and learn more about our students' cultures and their motivations, right? And then she also talks about being a builder, right? We're trying to build a classroom where everyone feels safe to learn. We're building relationships. And I do believe that building relationships is the most important thing. Building that trust with adult learners, that's how we really have an anti-racist classroom, right? I do think it's about slowing down and building relationships, right? And then the 4th role, which to me was the most exciting, was this idea of transformer, because I think often what's forgotten about in language teaching is that, learners are going through, at least, in our context in Minnesota, a lot of, for example, East African refugees who are coming over and are experiencing a new country, who are experiencing racism in a completely different way that they've never experiencing Islamophobia, right? Experiencing language bias, right? And is key to being a teacher of addressing these areas of discrimination that they are dealing with inside and outside of the classroom. And I do think that's an important part of being a teacher, right? So as I said, reading these 4 roles was by far the most transformative thing I read in grad school, and something just really clicked for me because I believe that this is what teaching should look like. Her roles are about sharing power, right? Sharing expertise, really getting to know learners' culture and languages, and building those strong relationships, right? That really center caring and include social justice, right? So in my study circle, like I said, it's 10 hours or 5 meetings, right? Or 5 main subjects. And that first meeting is an overview of those main frameworks of like, okay, first, what is anti-racism, right? What is culturally responsive teaching? And then the other 4 meetings each follow one of these roles, right? So 5 meetings and then kind of an overview, and then each other meeting looks at one of these roles and real life examples of, okay, how do we do this in the classroom, right? And I really take this book up in the right corner, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. That's kind of my main source for culturally responsive teaching. And then this article by Garcia, and I'm really mixing the two to give us examples of what does this look like in the classroom, right? You know, and again, it's all about where do we see these racist hierarchies showing up in our classroom and in our school, right? A lot of them are really subtle examples. And then it's how do we use these 4 roles to transform our classroom so that we honor all of learners' culture and linguistic backgrounds, right? So that we're seeing their full humanity. Okay. That's the main overview of like, what can you find content-wise in it? And so the next kind of big question is, okay, how can I use this, right? Out of the 2 study circles that I've done with Atlas so far, you know, they've gone pretty well. And that's one way that you could participate is an Atlas-led study circle. Now, most people are from Minnesota who are doing these study circles. We've had a few people out of state. I don't think we've had anyone out of the country. And that's maybe a question for Patsy Egan about whether or not, you know, people out of the country doing these study circles. But the great thing about this project is I do want this to happen on a global scale, right? And so the other option is taking the facilitator's guide that I've created, and so that you can go and lead it. You do not have to be an expert in any of these things. This guide, and we'll look at in a minute, has a very detailed explanation of all the materials that you'll use, everything that you need, activities for you to do. So again, you don't have to be an expert in any of this. It just takes someone taking the guide and following the instructions that I've created or adapting it for your own context too, right? And so my kind of biggest takeaway from doing these 2 study circles though so far with Atlas is that so much is packed into these 5 meetings. And I constantly tell the participants that 5 meetings is not enough, right? I've set the study circle up with hopefully, you know, good resources, discussion questions, and activities so that educators can start applying them directly to your classrooms. However, I also keep encouraging my participants that the conversation cannot end here, right? Continue reflecting on these questions. Take what we talked about in our study circle and go do the study circle again with your colleagues, or take one meeting and say, okay, y'all, we really need to talk about this idea of building a classroom based on trust and building relationships, right? So that it's anti-racism is a lifelong journey. So it's about continually talking about these things. The study circle is just a place to start. So even though I made the study circle with 5 meetings, you and your colleagues could use this over a semester or over a year, right? Or longer. I have that original group of colleagues that I talked about who were kind of, you know, the main inspiration for making this. They're taking this and doing a meeting a month for an hour and just slowly making their way through it. So there's lots of options, I hope, for people being able to take this and adapting it to your own context. What's important is that, you know, you start doing something and you just keep trying, right? Keep readdressing or trying to improve your classroom, right? Next question, how can you find it? Which I think is a super important one, right? And so let's take a look at the Atlas website. The links are all here in the slides too, so you can find them, but I have it already pulled up. Actually, let's see. Oh, sorry. There we go. Okay, so when you pull up the cultural competency library, right? You'll see here on the right, anti-racism in ABE. Click on that, and then you'll go down to anti-racist instruction down here. And then below that, you'll see the anti-racist praxis study circle, right? Click on that. And then here you'll see a little description of it, and then you can view resource. And once you view the resource, there's a longer description of it giving you more information, right? And then you've got 2 links down here at the bottom. So the first one is the facilitator's guide, which, you know, is here. It's lots of pages, but it gives you a whole table of contents and breaks down what to do for each meeting. All right. Again, it's long. We're not going to go through it or anything, but hopefully from the beginning helps you figure out, okay, where do I start, right? What do I need? And then the second link here is the Google folder that I created, right? And so this is what it will look like for y'all. And you'll see here is, in the bottom is the facilitator's guide again, right? And then each meeting of what you'll need. So if you click on meeting 1, you'll see pre-meeting and end meeting, right? So for example, in that pre-meeting, you'll see the email that I have an email template that you could send out to your colleagues, right? The one of the articles that you need. There is a discussion guide. Let me just open that one up. And each meeting has some pre-work because it is supposed to be a pretty intensive time for reflection too. And so, let's see. And you'll see here, I've got step-by-step of, okay, here's what you need to watch or do or read, right? And then it's a collaborative note-taking document because, like I said, not a lot of people are encouraged to spend a lot of time on anti-racist teaching. So I hope that a collaborative doc means that if someone can't do all of the reading or all of the questions, you can do a couple and then read each other's, and hopefully it just really helps. I believe, you know, this work is made easier through collaboration. So that's kind of the idea behind this document. Okay. So again, that is how you find it. Links are here in the slides for you, right? And then just to kind of end us out, I have said, you know, anti-racism, social justice are imperative in the classroom, right? There are messages every day that tell learners that their culture, experiences, their language are inferior, right? And so I really believe that this work is important and that, you know, and I'm hopefully, you know, inviting you to join me in this work, right? So whether you've done tons of anti-racism study or you're starting more recently, right? We can all still learn and grow. And the study circle can be kind of that next step for you and your colleagues, right? And after a lot of conversations with colleagues, I know many of us get stuck in that, stuck from implementing anti-racist practices, right? Changes, because we're afraid of making mistakes. We tell our learners it's okay to make mistakes, but often it's not the same for us, right? And so part of examining our own biases include reflecting on what stops us from doing this work. So I repeat these 3 quotes to myself to kind of continue inspiring me to go on. And so I just wanted to share them with you. First, we have Maya Angelou's quote, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better, right? We can only do as good as we can right now, right? But then we keep learning and we keep getting better. And again, I do repeat this to myself all the time, right? It's okay to resist perfectionism and just try something, right? It is a lifelong journey. I know I'll make plenty of mistakes, but I have to keep trying. And to really reinforce this idea, I like Kindy's quote too there on the right. To be anti-racist is to make mistakes, right? That is part of the journey. And then finally, I also like this quote by Bell Hooks, where she says, we cannot be scared of making mistakes. Otherwise, this word justice will never happen. So when you need some encouragement, I recommend saying one or all of these quotes to yourself and writing it where you can see it every day, for example. All right. And we're low on time. I figured we probably wouldn't have time for this video, so it's here in the slides for you to look at afterwards. But I truly believe, you know, I keep saying this, it's anti-racism is a lifelong journey. Anti-racist teaching is a lifestyle, right? It's not a bag of tricks or some magic pedagogy. This is a lifestyle that we have to commit to. So this is a good video too, all right? And from there, too much of me talking, so I'm going to pause and, you know, let Andrea take it from there.
Never too much. Thank you so much, Cydnee. That was fantastic. I think I put in the chat, I am actually currently going through the study circle right now with our last meeting happening tomorrow. And it's been some of the best professional development I've had. And the excitement of the people in the group talking about, we're already having side conversations of how do we make sure we keep this going and don't stop after the fifth meeting? So it's been great resources, great discussions, and really inspirational to think about how to make a lasting change. So thank you for doing this work and for coming and talking to us.
Yeah, thank you.
So at this point, are there any clarifying questions, anything that people would like to ask Cydnee specifically about the study circle, about the guide, where to find things, recommendations for thoughts about how you'd like to use it? And we'll also have another slide specifically asking about resonation, what resonated in questions. But any quick clarifications about the content of the session?
May I ask something? This is Monica. I was just looking at the some of the links that were sent out, and it was with the atlasabe.org. There's a link that says anti-racist educator self-examination and questionnaire. And I was wondering, I wasn't sure if I heard you talk about that, so I'm not sure if I missed something. But is that also part of this, or is that just something else from Atlas as well?
It is something else from Atlas, and let me see if I can pull it just to, again, kind of show y'all where I'm looking at. I go back to the main cultural competency resources. So you'll see here on the slide, on the right, anti-racism and ABE, and we've got three different little subgroups, right, of this. I can't think of a better word right now. And I think that first one that you mentioned is maybe in one of these, like getting started with anti-racism. If not.
Oh, okay, yeah, thank you. And I think I saw it just further down the main page as well, under the two bigger boxes there. So yeah, okay, that's great, thank you.
All right, and Cydnee, why don't we go on to the next slide, and I'm gonna start reading some of the things that are coming in from some questions and some comments that are coming in from the chat right now. So Kathleen is wondering if you could share an awkward moment that arose while teaching anti-racist content and how you handled it.
Kathleen, do you mean with like other educators or in the classroom? Could ask for that little clarification.
In the classroom, because I think that's a big fear that many teachers have, is something awkward will arise and I won't know how to respond or defend a student who might be on the end of the offense.
Yeah. I've taught two main levels in my time. And so one level we call pre-beginning, which is, low literate, less low learners, right? Who, I'm teaching basic phonics to. We have not really done conversations, right, about this stuff. So, and that is a majority of my teaching experience. However, I do feel like there's still at that low level so many things you can do with the content that you teach, right, in terms of like the stories that you use, making sure that they show immigrant stories. Or I used a book, most of my class was Somali, and so we used a book that was about a Somali woman coming to the States and adjusting to life in Minnesota. The pictures that I use, right, so those are little things that you can do at that low level. And then with my higher levels, I've taught more of like kind of university levels, and we have these really great deep conversations about some of the stuff. And I make sure that I'm upfront with them of like, I'm not like an expert. I'm not trying to change y'all's mind. We all come from very different cultures, right? And though I may strongly believe in women's rights, for an example, like I taught a lot of Saudi students, and like, I don't want to assume that, like, I'm not trying to change anyone, right? But we together created this poster of, respectful ways to disagree with people. And I found that really helpful of like, that's a great point, but I see it this way. Some sentence starters to kind of help this idea of having these conversations with learners that support that, we may be on different pages, but we can still kind of talk about it. And honestly, I haven't really had any big problems, but again, just trying to I know I hold power as the teacher, so I don't want to completely control the conversation and say, you have to believe what I believe. And I think, you know, that's been the most helpful for me. And I haven't had too many problems other than that. In terms of like, I know some people worry about, you know, I lived in Minnesota. So, you know, obviously the killing of George Floyd was a huge thing in our classrooms, right? And so just making space for people to talk about it, to ask, do you understand what's going on in the news? Do you understand, you know, why everyone is protesting right now? Kind of coming at it from a like, let's make sure you understand first in this US context. And that's also been helpful in giving people space to kind of reflect on it if they want, but if they don't, you know, and I just believe the other thing is just keep trying, right? We're going to fumble our words, we're going to mess up, but just trying to keep practicing.
Thank you.
Great. And there's a couple people, Katie and Jessica, who said they thank you for, first off, saying thank you for creating this, and then saying that they are already using it. So in Utah, and then Jessica saying that the facilitator's guide is easy to use and the slides are easy to adapt for your own setting.
Oh gosh, can I just say I didn't know, oh.
So no, sorry, go ahead, Cydnee. I was just going to say that there is also a question from Lucy earlier about whether it would work with a smaller group, 3 or 4 teachers, for example.
Yeah, let me first say, to hear that people are using this is so great to hear, because you worry when you do a project like this that it will go into the black hole of the internet or academia, right? And I had no idea anyone else has used it, so I'm so excited to hear that. And then to Rola's question that I saw is in the chat, yes, you can definitely do this with small groups. You know, you really could do this by yourself, you know, but going through some of these activities by yourself, you're obviously not having conversations. And I won't think that this should be done in collaboration, having these discussions with your colleagues. But yes, you could definitely do it in small groups.
Yeah, and people pointing out that, or Kathleen pointing out, appreciate the acknowledgement of the teacher's power in the classroom. How important it is to be aware of that and talk about that. And I know I work with less learners right now, and something that has been coming up is the avoiding making kind of those broad, generalized, sweeping statements about an entire culture that sometimes will come up when students are talking in classroom about their experiences, and balancing the power of the teacher with making sure that people have an opportunity to share their own experiences, but talking a lot about how some people, or in my experience, or things that I've seen, as opposed to just making those really general, broad, all people statements. Something that we've worked on in the class. And I also spend a lot of time telling my students, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I see, Marisol, you have your hand up.
Yeah, well, Cydnee, what a great way to spend Tuesday. What a great way to spend any day. I just wanted to ask a couple questions, and I think they're related. But on the one hand, I've always been fascinated by our language learners' fascination with Black language, and I've often wondered, you know, what are some great ways to explore that as part of just all language varieties, and I just wondered what your thoughts were on that. And then 2, I think related to this, as a teacher educator, I often find, even in my own university, there's the camp that is advocating for anti-racist praxis around Black language. And then there's the English language teachers who are doing something else. And we don't often get opportunities to connect around language ideologies in general. And I'm just wondering what you've seen that's positive, that has really nurtured that connection. Just reminds me of the old bilingual education debates, where there were like the bilingual teachers and then the ESL teachers, and we were operating in separate spheres. And is it happening again? I can't tell. I don't have a big picture on this, and I would just love your thoughts on either of those two questions.
I have to say, I'm not really good at following long questions because I then start processing what you said 20 minutes ago. Is there?
And I'm really good at asking really long-winded questions. So we are. So,
I don't want to make you repeat anything, but is there any like?
The first one was just nurturing curiosity about Black language, and I thought about that around your slide about don't worry about mistakes, but it often feels like there's a mistake you might make around that question, and it might clamp down the fear either on the part of the teacher or the student. And then if there's time, I can ask the second.
Just kind of first thoughts for that one is I do think a huge part of teaching English is showing, all the varieties of English, or as many as you can, right? And so not only showing kind of standard academic sources, but also, for example, like Black English or African American vernacular, showing that there are different versions of English, or having, clips of Indian English or Kenyan English, right? To show that we all speak, a little differently, and what are those communication strategies that we can have, and really just framing it as there's not one version that's, superior, though society is kind of telling us that, academic English obviously is needed for a lot of things, but just having that open conversation with learners.
Thank you. I don't want to monopolize Andrea. So if there's somebody else has a question, or there's stuff in the chat as well.
And feel free to email me or something too. I don't know if I can put my email in the chat too.
Thanks.
If anyone wants to contact me.
So there's some comment in the chat just drawing people's attention to it, talking about restorative circles and looking at all of the different identities that people relate to. And thank you, Cydnee, for sharing your email. I think we're looking at keeping an eye on the time. We need to start wrapping up. But just like Cydnee was saying with the study circle, this is only the beginning of the conversation. So just want to take a moment and say again, thank you, Cydnee, for volunteering your time to come and share. Thank you for all of the time, work, and thought that you've put into this. And I hope that being here and hearing that this is resources already out there and being used for you is a huge affirmation of how needed this is and how excited people are about the work you're doing. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, for sure.
All right, so if we go on to the next slide, just wanted to let people know that we do have a Padlet for if there are other topics that you would like to see LESLA coffee breaks address. If there are projects that people are working on that you think are fantastic and you like to bring to the attention of the field, you can go into this Padlet, and at any time, and I'll send this link out in the follow-up email as well, please share your ideas. Do you know somebody who's doing work? Please let us know, alert us to who that is and what they're doing, so that we can make sure that their work has an opportunity to be shared with a wider community. Right, and if we go up to the next slide, Rola is going to talk through our exciting LESLA announcements. And we also have, Marisol will share about our proceedings.
Yes, so I think thank you all for being here and for being great LESLA supporters. We've got some exciting news about new open board positions. So we've got 5 vacancies currently that are open on the board. So please nominate yourself, nominate someone you know. And I can tell you from years of experience and being on the board, this is the most rewarding experience of one of the most rewarding experiences of my professional life. So I would definitely encourage you to consider joining the board. If you've got any questions about anything related to this, we've got also frequently asked questions. We've got a video recording of when we also did a session in order to introduce interested candidates in the answer any questions they've got about the positions and so on. So the nomination form, the open board positions have already been shared in the chat. Thanks, Andrea. And I'll leave it now to Marisol to share some news about the proceeding before I announce another exciting news item. Yeah.
Thanks, Rola. I just wanted to say quickly that the LESLA 2021 proceedings is still in the works. If you scroll up to earlier chats, there are two great articles that I think are very relevant to Cydnee's comments earlier about translanguaging. If you submitted an article, apologies for this, is the work productivity with a new management portal hasn't been great, but we are working on it. We see you, we'll be in touch. And if you have any questions, I'll also throw my email in the chat and you can follow up with me directly. And Nicole and I will address your questions.
Yes, and I think for the other, if you don't mind moving to the next slide, please, Cydnee. Yes, the other piece of news is that if you don't know already, we're having the LESLA symposium this year in Arizona. And it's got like quite an important theme on the focus on the future, surprises, opportunities, and collaborations. So please consider joining us. This will be a hybrid event with the 19th being online and virtual, and the 20th and the 21st as in person. We've got already school visits booked and other events. So please check the website and consider joining us in person. It will be quite a good opportunities to collaborate and meet the new board members and say goodbye to the leaving board members and so on. And I think for the early bird registration also deadline, thank you, Kate, for sharing this, is the 15th of the 8th. So still you've got plenty of time to register for the event, even if you're not presenting, just think and consider joining us there. And I think that's it from us for today. So any questions about any of the nominations, the elections, the conference, the proceedings, or the session, any reflections, we're happy to hear about.
Yeah, and also our board member Ines is in here and she said, put it out in the chat. If you have any news, let us know and we will get that shared out to the website and to our social media. So any LESLA related news, please alert us.
Yes, we're always happy to support like any kind of like, whether it is policy news, whether it is like resources that you've come across and you found quite like interesting and you think they are worth sharing with the other LESLA community. Just think about like joining our social media platforms and email us or get in touch and we will be happy to support whatever news you've got.
And as we're wrapping up, could we do one more? Cydnee, could you turn on your camera and all of the board members, because we have some more board members who joined. Could you turn on your cameras and so people can actually see our faces? And Kate, our newest board member, is here with Katie as well. And then I'm going to just invite everybody else